Hello everybody! Welcome to the live stream. Mr. Handy's in the dark there. Whoop. Today on our Twitch live stream at twitch.tv/punishedprops, we are going to work on my little Mr. Handy model. This guy is 3D modeled and 3D printed. I modeled him all in Fusion 360. And today I'm going to be cleaning up this model and get it ready for mold making. So follow along as we do a lot of sanding. In fact, I have a whole bunch of model sanding tools that I want to show off to you guys so that you can sort of up your game when it comes to modeling and cleaning up little guys like this. All of these tools will be linked on punishedprops.com in the description for this video. So, starting, we have our basic sandpaper. I like to have a 100 grit sandpaper and a 220 grit sandpaper. Now, for cleaning up 3D prints like this, I usually start with the 220. But if I have to remove a lot of material, the 100 grit helps out with that. Now, to go with those, I have two sanding blocks. You can see I've written the type of sandpaper on them because the color changes sometimes. So here's my 100 grit one and here's my 220 grit one, and they're always ready and they always have fresh paper on them, good to go. Moving along, we have a bunch of needle files, and these are all different shapes. They come in packs with a bunch of different shapes. These just happen to be my favorite shapes. This flat one I use the most, I think. This is again for shaping and removing a little bit more material than just sandpaper. I have a round one, I have a square one, and a triangular one. These guys are really cheap and really useful, especially for small details. Next we have a couple of things that are very similar. This is an Emery board, or just a nail file, you know, for cleaning up all your nice, all the gross looking prop makers' fingernails, but also amazing for sanding your model kits. Nice, flat, sturdy, really good for getting around contours and stuff, especially if you have some slightly bigger areas to hit. If you have smaller areas to hit, you can get sanding twigs. Now these are essentially the same thing as your Emery board. They're just cut into nice thin strips in a variety of different grits. So here's a little one that I like to use for getting into your tiny detail parts when you need to. They make them in a variety of different widths too. So this one here is really thin. It's about a 1/16 of an inch thick, but when you need it to get into really tiny areas, it's super handy to have. If you don't have the access to that, you just have some sandpaper, you can make your own, and a lot of these that I've made myself are ones that I still use. This is a dowel with a 220 grit on one side and a 100 grit on the other side. Here's another dowel with a piece of sandpaper glued to the end of it. Here is, again, a popsicle stick with 220 and 100 on either side. And then here's just a bigger popsicle stick with some 220 glued to it. The tools that you make can be, you know, tailor fit to the job that you need them. So that makes them really handy, and why I still keep them around. In fact, this guy right here, I think I've had for like 5 years. I should probably throw it away, but I'm kind of attached to it. These guys right here are sanding sponges, and I use these a lot. Usually in like a medium or a fine grit, but if you're trying to get things nice and smooth, these things can be really handy. And they're really good for going around curves and stuff, or contours, or more organic shapes. These things are absolutely essential. If you want to get a little bit fancier, you can get one of these detail sanders. They're not super expensive, and they come with several of the tools. It's like a little pen that's got a spring in it so that you can remove the sanding belt. This one right here is pretty beat up. It comes with a whole bunch of different sanding belts and a bunch of different grits, so you can just replace it, put it back on to your tool like so, and you've got a neat little tool. You can rotate the sanding belt around to a cleaner area. It's got this tip that's got some nice support, so you can get into little nooks and crannies. These things are really nice. And finally, the super duper fancy model making tool. I spent a little money on this, but I wanted to try it out. This is a pen sander. This is by Proxxon. They make a bunch of different tools that work with this 12-volt transformer. So this is the pen sander. It's got a bunch of different tips that you can replace, these little plastic tips that are different shapes, I really like the triangular one. You just stick a piece of sandpaper on the end of it there that comes with its own, like so. But I also make my own sanding tips just by using double-sided tape and my own sandpaper, so I can replace them. But you can see there's a bunch of different shaped tips that it comes with, like so. The tips go right into the machine, like so. They lock in place. And then this thing just oscillates back and forth. And there are some jobs, I'll tell you, it is so handy to have this machine. So I can go in and sand this sort of internal area that would be hard to reach. Oh. There it goes. Like that. And that's way easier than doing that by hand. So yeah, if you're looking to spend a little extra coin, this machine is really, really handy. So there you go. There are the sanding tools I'm going to be using on Mr. Handy right here for the next while as we put this guy together. They're all really, really great tools, and you'll get to see me utilize some of them on this build. So most of the surface sanding on this I can do with just a 220 grit paper. And what I'm really trying to do is get rid of the lines, the 3D printing lines. So a lot of it is just going, I'll sand against the grain essentially to try and remove some of those lines there. And I replace this sandpaper frequently. I have this big pile of sandpaper. It's really cheap. I just keep replacing it. Alright, so here are two different pieces. This is before it's been sanded, and this is after it's been sanded. So the beforehand, you can still see all of the layers from the 3D printing. And the goal with the sanding is to get rid of those layers. I'll go back in and spray this with filler primer, this guy here. But this gives me a really nice base with very little texture to get rid of at this point. So that's the goal when I'm doing this sanding, is to get rid of this. Now people will point out I could put XTC 3D on there first to fill that in, but I prefer to get rid of as much texture as possible before adding any more material. So these are the sanding twigs, and seriously, go get some of them. They're really, really handy. If the end of it's getting a little bit beat up, you can just take a knife and trim it off, like so. And you've got a nice clean tip to work from. You can also shape these, so if you want to use just like a triangular shape like that to get into little areas, you can modify it to your needs. So for this one, I just need the end of it to be nice and clean. I'm going to do that, and then I can use that right there to sand all my tiny details, like so. Very exciting. This backplate was modeled and printed separate than the rest of it because I wanted to try a couple of things. The text on there in the model is embossed, but I couldn't think of a good way to do it, so I decided to just make it a relief. And the first test was with my laser cutter. Well, I wasn't sure how the PLA was going to work, so I made a separate piece and 3D printed it apart from the main body so I wouldn't have to reprint the entire thing. And I just did a vector laser or a raster laser cut or etch on here, and it turned out awesome. And then I took that piece and I glued it to the whole body part there, and whoop, and there we go. It turned out really great. That little back plate there with a super duper detailed some words on there. This is it. 99% of prop making right here. Some of the details I just can't sand away without removing too much of the surface there, so I'm going to fill it in with some of this spot glazing putty. I've got some of these little metal tools for that to just lay a little bit of putty in there. I'm just trying to fill in that texture. So I just take a tiny bit of spot glazing putty and lay it down in that texture like so. This will fill anything up to, let's say, a 1/16 of an inch. So you don't want to use it for really, really deep recesses, but this will do a good job of helping remove some of that texture. And it's air drying, so you just have to lay it in there and then wait for it to completely dry. The thicker you lay it on, the longer it will take to dry. This is a piece that I did earlier. It's nice and dry and ready to sand. I'll just take some 220 grit sandpaper and give it a little roughing up. And what I'm left with is a surface that no longer has that texture that was left from the 3D printing process. So there is our Mr. Handy robot. I sanded some of him today, and I'm going to keep working on this diligently. And of course, if you guys want to follow along with this build, we've got a bunch of social media places over here where you can check it out. Instagram's a good place. I've been throwing this guy on here. In fact, I put a video of him on there yesterday. You can go check that out. Thank you, of course, for hanging out with us today. If you want to catch our live streams, we do them every Tuesday at noon Pacific, and we do our Q&A show at 5 p.m. on Thursdays, again, in the Pacific time zone. Thank you again so much for watching, you guys, and we will see you on the next live stream. It never ends.